Now let's start talking about populations and samples. So as just the kind of core idea behind this, populations are the entire group that we're trying to study, and a sample is going to be just what data we're able to gather from that. So I'll expand on those ideas as I go through this video. So this population of a study or an experiment is the entire group that we're trying to describe, right? That we're trying to get information about and make some claims about, make some decisions about, but it's going to be the entire group, not just the individuals we were able to get data from. And we need to specify this population as step one of any kind of analysis that we ever do. And the reason why is because that's actually telling us who we should be gathering the data from. Right? It may restrict things so that it's actually easier to just directly target who we're trying to get data from, or it may actually just make it more clear so that we understand what we're working with. So let me kind of go through some examples here of just what populations we might be interested in as we're trying to study the amount of money that first-year college students spend on their textbooks. Okay, so our population might be all first-year students here at Casper College, but if I do that, I will only be able to make claims about first-year students at Casper College, right? So if I figure out that they're spending a total of $600 on textbooks in their first year, then I can't say if that even applies to the rest of Wyoming, certainly not to the entire United States, right? And so, hey, maybe actually I'm not just interested in Casper, I'm interested in college students in Wyoming in general. And if that's the case, then I better go get some data from people outside of our college here in Casper. Or if I actually want to say, well, any actually just public institution here, I better include University of Wyoming also, right? Because that's going to be a different thing. And generally speaking, community colleges are far more forward-thinking in terms of saving students money than a full university might be. And so that might be a completely different number than we would get here at Casper College. And we also, if we're trying to make, again, a claim about the entire United States, well, now I need to go gather data from people all over the U.S. And so, you know, I went through these as increasing population sizes, but I might be going the other way where, like, you know, we might start with the question of how much do textbooks cost for students first entering college? And if the reason we're asking that is because we want to see if our bookstore is costing too much money, well, I don't really care about what they're costing all over the U.S. or at other places in Wyoming. I only care about here in Casper, and so I can gather that data much more easily and readily than I would if I were trying to make claims about the U.S. as a whole. So this is going to very strongly affect the cost, the amount of time that we spend on gathering this data. So this, again, really needs to be our step one, is figuring out what our population is. And we're actually going to get different answers to our question of how much do these textbooks cost, depending on what we specify as that population. So this is a very important step that we can't skip. And related to that is a parameter. So right now, we haven't really talked about statistical measures, but you've at least heard of an average or a percentage. So I'll just use those as kind of like a base idea of what we might be considering as a parameter. And it describes the population as a whole. And lots of times when you hear a statistic, they actually mean a parameter. So a statistic, technically speaking, and I'll get to that in just a moment, is actually really only talking about our sample. When we're trying to generalize that to the entire population, that thing that I'm generalizing to is a parameter. So those statistics I gave in the first video of this unit about average home price in Casper is $288,000. Or median household income is this, 74.5% of Wyoming residents own their home. I didn't get called and asked for any of this information. I was not included in these samples. So these are not, strictly speaking, 100% accurate numbers for the population of Wyoming residents or homes here in Casper. What that really is an estimate of those things. And so when you read this kind of stuff, right, they didn't say the household income among the 70 houses we looked at was $67,000. They just said in Casper at all. They're making a claim that what their sample showed, right, what their data that they gathered is a perfect representation of what things are in Casper as a whole. And as soon as I start making claims about the whole population, right, so this would be about all houses in Casper, I'm now working with this thing that we're calling a parameter. So that's what a parameter is, and know that that goes together with these populations. Okay, and a related thing is what's called a census. And this is when a survey is done of the entire population. Okay, so when I do that, when I gather a piece of data from every single member of a population, it's called a census. Okay, so that's what we mean in statistics. You've probably heard of the US Census, which aims to get an absolutely enormous sample size, but they literally cannot do what a statistician would call a census. Like literally in the time that it takes to gather that data, people would die and people would be born in that time period. It is absolutely impossible to do a true census of, for example, incomes in the US. We're just calling it a census because it's very large. So just be aware of how we use that word in like the news. They're talking about a very big sample versus in a statistics or math class where we're very strictly saying, no, a census needs to be literally every individual in that population. And the population doesn't need to be everybody, right? Like in terms of like the English understanding, right? So if I'm interested in, the how much these textbooks are costing for Casper College students, Casper College students is my population, not just everyone that lives in Casper. Okay, I know when we say the population here in Casper, we tend to think of it as like literally every person, but the population is everyone we're studying. And it doesn't even make sense to ask my retired neighbors how much they're spending on textbooks in their first year of college, right? Like that's irrelevant. And maybe doesn't even have an answer. So just be aware of that. This idea of a population and a census are a little bit different in statistics versus in plain English kind of ideas. Okay. Now we should actually be talking about a sample, which is the subset of that population as a whole. And unfortunately, it's used in two different ways, even in statistics. So it can be the individuals that we're actually getting the data from, or it can be the data we've collected. So let me try to clarify what I'm saying there. So if I go out and I ask 40 students how much they spent on their textbooks, the sample, the word sample there, could mean the 40 students that I got the data from, or it could mean, right, like $400, $300, $250, $175, $600, right? It could be the actual data I gathered from them. Both of those are referred to as the sample. Okay, so I'm sorry, that's just how it's used. It wasn't my choice. That's just how it's used. Okay, so a statistic then is something calculated from the sample. Okay, so directly speaking, these statistics really only perfectly describe the sample. We have to be very careful looking at how the data was gathered, what kind of biases there were in that data gathering, and all of that before we should feel comfortable saying whatever that was in our sample, right, whatever statistic we just calculated is good enough that we can make a claim about it and the population as a whole, and it becomes a good estimate then of a parameter. So as just before I get into some examples that will hopefully clarify these four words for us, let me at least use alliteration to help you remember how they go together. Alliteration is just when the first sounds sound the same in different words. So it would be parameters are about populations, and statistics are about samples. So just remember that for these two things of parameters and statistics and how they relate to populations and samples.